A Journey Towards Empathy, a presentation by Kelsie Schoenly for Counseling 613 Empathy Training for Colorado Christian University's Master of Arts in Counseling program. As I conclude this class in empathy training, I reflect on how far I've come in 7 weeks of intentional reflection on a subject that I believe will have lifelong impact on not only my counselor-client interactions, but relationships in my personal and family life as well. Empathy is a topic that is worth committing to exploring and understanding more deeply for the rest of one's life. For the purpose of this presentation, I will begin with the 3 most pertinent lessons that I'm taking away from the last 7 weeks of learning, discussing, and reflecting. The first lesson that proves to be a foundation for everything that follows concerns the very definition of empathy. Approaching this class, I would have oversimplified the definition to mean putting oneself in another's shoes. And while that concept definitely plays into a correct understanding of empathy, I've learned that it's much more complex and even controversial than that. In the very first chapter of the Social Neuroscience of Empathy, Daniel Batson explains that there are 8 possible understandings of empathy, each of which is attempting to answer one of 2 questions. I have had my mind open to realize that empathy is much more than I had previously understood. There are different approaches, different explanations of its importance and its overall impact in the counselor-client relationship, as well as methods that include psychological, relational, and physical dynamics. The overarching aim seems to be one of truly understanding who another person is, but more than that, what they are thinking and feeling about past, current, and future situations in their life, and how we can come to know that experience. The second lesson pertains to expressing empathy to others. 7 weeks ago, I would have readily shared that I am a naturally empathetic person. While I still believe that I have strong empathy skills, I've come to realize that there are certain populations of people that I do have a harder time expressing empathy towards. I had just never taken the time to reflect on who those people are that I might not naturally feel empathy for. The main populations I've realized I'll have to grow in empathy towards are, on a broad scale, individuals who are involved in deliberate violation and harm towards others. This can include individuals involved in terrorist organizations or hate, racist groups, perpetrators of abuse, neglect, or sexual misconduct, individuals who are kidnapping and trafficking other humans for profit, and that's just to name a few. These groups of people I feel an automatic instinct to judge, to dismiss, and to avoid. It has been helpful for me to realize that I have these biases because I believe that I can overcome them to see the humanity and potential of those involved in such groups. I will, however, need to exercise deliberate caution as I approach these individuals in the future. The third lesson that I'm taking away from this class involves the physical side of empathy. That is, the concepts of mirroring and mimicry and how they are subconsciously used in human interactions to empathetically relate to others. Mimicry can be facial, vocal, postural, and the mirrored or reciprocated by the other in order to create the effect of emotional contagion. I was aware that this was a psychological concept before this class, but I wouldn't have known to connect it to empathy and more specifically emotional contagion. And this can be an entirely non-conscious occurrence within human interactions. For example, from my personal life, during a season in which I was teaching English in South America, I had very little training in classroom management, but one major tool I used to calm a boisterous student or an overly active classroom was to, first of all, deliberately control what I was feeling, to not allow stress to be overriding my emotions, but to remain calm in my demeanor, and then to express that through my tone of voice and my facial expressions. I would speak very softly and kindly, sometimes even whispering, and it was amazing to see how students subconsciously picked up on my demeanor and would mirror my expressions and calm and quiet themselves as well. I didn't realize at the time that I was employing these concepts of emotional contagion through mimicry and mirroring. So I enjoyed learning more about how this works in relation to empathy and translating emotions from one person to another. Another helpful aspect of this class was reflecting on my strengths and weaknesses as it relates to empathy to consider how I may grow in these areas. I would say my top strengths in empathy would be my emotional intelligence in understanding others, my ability to take on new perspectives, and self awareness of my own emotions. By emotional intelligence, I mean that I am acutely observant and aware of the emotional states of those around me. I've been known to walk into a room or approach a conversation and very quickly pick up on the emotions of others. Sometimes I can pick up on what someone else is feeling and not even quite realize that I'm it's just so subconsciously I'm feeling what someone else is feeling. I have to reflect on the fact that, oh, I think I feel this way because this person is experiencing this particular thing. I also am able to consciously and thoughtfully consider perspectives outside of my own, so that even if I don't take those perspectives on as my own perspective, I'm able to understand where people are coming from and how they could have reached the conclusions that they have. I also am self aware in the way that I can easily identify my own emotions of what I'm feeling, why I'm feeling that way, and to make sure that I am not allowing those emotions to control the way I act and the way I feel. I believe that these three strengths will have immense impact in my future profession as a counselor. First of all, with regards to being able to identify and understand the emotions of others, reflective listening and thoughtful confrontation will be useful to continue to practice and implement in my conversations with others. Reflective listening is a powerful tool that can be used to help others see that you're listening and understanding what they're sharing, but also to help them gain greater clarity into their own experience. Confrontation, or sharing your observations, can be helpful to go beneath the surface and arrive at the heart of what someone is experiencing. For example, in my own daily interactions, I'll often communicate things like, I sense that you're hesitating. What's going on? Or, it appears to me that you're experiencing some anxiety. How are you? Another key component in empathetically expressing my strengths would be open ended questions that give space to the other to share about themselves and their experience so that I'm not wrongly assuming anything, which leads to the next topic of exploring weaknesses. I can often use judgment as a way of making wrong assumptions of another human being. I can be too quick to make an assessment of who I think a person is, and it's based on my own values and understanding. And then that can lead me to dismiss the person as a result. For example, I personally value diligence, discipline, and hard work, and I drive myself to maintain those values in my life. So, I can often look down upon others who I deem as being undisciplined and perhaps even lazy. That negative viewpoint then becomes a lens by which I may wrongly interpret other things I observe and learn of them. Another weakness is that I can become far too emotionally invested in another person, especially as that person is sharing of a deep and personal struggle they're experiencing. I can empathize too much to the point of losing objectivity and allowing it to emotionally inhibit me from being of any help to the other person. While I realize that it can be healing for an individual to have someone join them in their place of struggle, it is important to not have one's discernment clouded in the process of expressing empathy. As I look to how I can overcome these weaknesses, I personally get excited rather than discouraged in reflecting on this because it gives me a great starting point for growth. I realize that while it's a positive thing for me to have my own personal values and convictions and to live by those values and convictions, I can't interpret others through the lens of those convictions. I desire to embrace others with the Rogerian concept of unconditional positive regard, deliberately choosing to give others the benefit of the doubt. I desire to embrace differences as an opportunity to learn from the other and remain emotionally objective through the strength of self awareness in order that I may best connect with others and not be inhibited by my own assumptions and judgment. As I think about a specific plan for improvement, my overall plan has four main strategies. I'd like to first of all seek out mentoring conversations with counselors in the field who can speak out of their expertise and wisdom to offer advice. Secondly, I'm an avid follower of podcasts. I spend about an hour and a half commuting to and from work every day, and I mostly listen to podcasts. So I'd like to be more intentional to select podcast shows that speak from different viewpoints than my own, and then to reflect on their perspectives, to ask questions of why they might think the way they do and how they came to have the view that they have. I also plan to do further reading on the topic of empathy to develop these skills. Lastly, I believe that going through counseling myself will help me to explore my weaknesses and potential biases to be able to more effectively counsel others in the future. Ultimately, as I seek to grow in empathy, I look to Jesus Christ as my example. Throughout the Gospels, we see him debunking the social constraints of his day to embrace those that others would have written off. I think of the chapter 8 of John, in which Jesus levels the playing field for an adulterous woman surrounded by people who were ready to stone her. While Jesus certainly wasn't condoning adultery, he looked beyond her wrong action to see her base humanity, that she was a human being created in God's holy image, and he extended grace and new life to her in his defense and acceptance of her. Jesus also is very often criticized for his choice of friends and dinner companions. He was known to dine with sinners, prostitutes, and those who society would consider outcasts. He made it his mission to heal and proclaim good news to those who were leprous, mute, blind, demon-possessed, and he entered into their world in order that he may bring light to it and restore it. This is one of the most powerful examples of empathy I can turn to in my own quest to grow in this area. I believe that what we see in Jesus' example that we can ultimately apply to our own expressions of empathy is humility. Jesus Christ, though he was God and King, emptied himself and chose to associate himself with those on the fringes of society. He truly entered into their situation, understood it, and decided to bring clarity and healing to it. I can do the same. I myself am so dependent upon grace that I want to let go of my pride and humbly and unconditionally extend that grace to others through empathy. In conclusion, this class has truly enlightened my mind and heart to more deeply understand both the complexity and the power of empathy in the counselor-client relationship. I have been given a foundation through this class to continue to build upon as I move forward in preparation for my career as a counselor, and for that I will always be grateful.